Hey guys, welcome to Module 3. This module is specifically intended to introduce some ideas of color theory. So how do you choose colors, why do certain colors look better together than others, all of that. And then also to introduce really basic cascading style sheets. The assignments for this module all work towards this goal. It's an attempt to get you to think deeply about the pre-work of your design before you really sit down and start having to write a whole lot. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into color theory. This is a relatively long lecture from a number of slides. So if you have not been downloading the PowerPoints from Blackboard, this would be a great one to start with and take notes as we talk through everything. Okay, so there's a little bit that is misunderstood about color. First off, what we see as color actually makes up a very small percentage of the light rays and waves around us. Okay, so what we consider to be visible color, visible light, is actually quite small. And of course, the problem with the theory is just that colors that are really similar to each other are so close on the color wheel, right? And they're so close on the color wheel because they only make up a tiny fraction of difference in the wavelength. And that's quite a problem for us because it means that we can't really have a lot of differentiation from colors that are really close to one another. So for instance, if we take this slice right there, they're pretty similar to each other, and if we look, you can see that even though this is a relatively large amount of the color wheel, there's not a lot of difference between right here and say right in the middle, or right in the middle to all the way to the left of that little slice. That can work out in your benefit if what you're trying to do is really subtle. So maybe you want your site to have one dominant color, and then you want all the other colors to kind of be close to and complementary, but not have a lot of contrast. Well, this is a good way to do it. However, even in this site, you'll notice they have the contrast of the white and the silver and then the green up here. So it's not something you would want to do site-wide. In another case, you might use it for your background, and then for things that you really want to pop, you can use contrast. Same idea here. Contrast allows things to pop. The analogous colors really just kind of blend into one another up here in the header, as well as down here on the penguin. So that leads us to the next type of colors. So complementary colors are colors that contrast a lot. So they are on opposite ends of the color wheel. So if you have a color over here, you go straight across, and you end up with a color over there. So you know, blue and this kind of mid-orange yellow, or purple and that greenish yellow kind of color. Same thing right there, same thing right there. So you know, you end up with these colors that are broadly across from one another. And we see this here. So these two colors are pretty much across the wheel from one another. Same here, as you end up with this green that really pops, as well as they were very smart in choosing this image. It has a lot of green in it. All of these headers down here that they want to emphasize, all of them pretty much are contrasting colors. Same idea here. I don't know why I went with a food theme for all of these websites, but there you go. So these colors, however, can be less contrasting, and they can be put into a grouping of three. I was going to say a pair of three. That would make no sense. So a grouping of three you call a triadic color, and these are colors that have an equal distance from one another on the color wheel. So you would have this kind of golden yellow, this tealish turquoise color, and then purple. Then you have the next grouping is a tetradic color, and this is a combination of two complementary color pairs. So you have ones that are right across from each other, and then you add another one that is right across from each other. So really, each color is a quarter of the wheel away from one another. So these two colors are somewhat complementary. These two are somewhat, these two are somewhat, those two are somewhat. But if you put them all together, you end up with a couple really nice contrasting pairs. There's even more practical information that I wish that I could pour all of it to you in this short time, but there are some colors like red and orange and yellow that seem to advance off the screen, and it has to do with the nature of the wavelength that red is created by. And so it just seems to push off the screen a little bit, whereas blues and purples and greens tend to kind of shrink back into the background. So you can see this, the blues, while very bright and vibrant, don't seem to have the same pop as the reds. Much in the same way, the red wing really flies off towards you, whereas the blue, everything else kind of flies into the background. So in this case, same idea. The oranges really pop versus the blues that kind of hang out. The reds really jump off. Even the orange here really kind of pops out. But everything else kind of is subdued. So a few best practices. Don't put light type against anything that's already light or bright. That's pretty logical, right? Like, looking at this kind of hurts your eyes, partly because yellow is a very advancing color, and then you put white, which is not that advancing of a color. So the background is advancing more than the background, more than the text in the foreground, and it makes it really hard to focus. Much in the same way, you don't want to put really dark things against really dark things. I don't know if you can read this, but this says, don't put any, basically it says, nor put dark type against an already dark or black background, right? Like, that's just logical. Sometimes gradients can be cool, and most times they're just really annoying, especially if you have a gradient that has a massive change. It goes from white to black, and your text is black. Well, obviously your text is going to disappear when it gets into the gradient. So there's a certain amount of psychology to this whole thing that we have to think through when we choose colors for our websites, which one of the assignments for this module is that you're going to pick out some colors. You're going to go on some websites that will help you pick out a color scheme, and you're going to pick out some colors. And the really important thing to consider here is that color is nonverbal. It is both visceral and intellectual. So it is something that some colors just naturally emote things within us. They well up these emotions within us, and they're also colors that we can cue into and that draw our attention. Color might be described actually as kind of manipulative. You can use color to cause your viewers and your users to have particular emotions without having to say something really sad. You can make your website feel really sad by the colors you use. So there's some elements of all of this. The first one is resonance. Resonance is kind of this idea of how much we feel the light and the color. Color has a profound effect on our emotional state, and so resonance really is the cause of that. And so we can go through some different ones here. So red, it's going to feel really powerful. It's fast. It's angry. It can also feel a little sensual if you use the right shade of red, which is really interesting. It can be both positive or negative depending on the case. Yellow is pretty aggressive also given the wavelength, but if you consume it in large quantities, so like that background from earlier where it was all yellow, it really starts to hurt your eyes after a while. It's hard to really take in that much yellow. It can be visually confusing. It can be, it can induce some anxiety, but it can also be cheery if it's used in the right way. It can also be really hard to see, so it causes people to squint, and so there's a lot of interesting things about yellow. Green is similarly kind of dualistic. It's both positive and negative. There's certain green things like ooze or some kind of chemical that could kill you, but also trees are green, and while not in Lubbock, most of the time grass is green, and so it can have feelings of life and growth and all of that. Orange is a generally pretty positive color. It can feel warm if you use the right shade. It can also look like baby poop if you use the wrong shade. So it's something to be aware of, is that choosing an orange is really, really hard. And if you don't believe me, go look at somebody's house where they tried to choose an orange for like an accent wall and they chose poorly. It's really bad when it goes poorly. Blue is kind of hard because it can induce feelings of stability and calmness and all that, but it can also make people feel really powerless and like there's not a lot they can do. It's kind of like being in the middle of the ocean. Purple is not an extremely common color in the real world. Maybe some natural flowers. I don't think there are any animals that are just completely purple on their own. And so it's not something that we really, as humans, encountered a lot when we weren't living in big houses, when we lived in caves. And so it kind of wells up these feelings of spirituality, of royalty, of something different from the norm. So purple can be really hard. Purple also doesn't contrast very well at times with other colors, and so you have to be really careful with it. Any color that you choose is going to be equated with a particular feeling or emotion, and to some extent, culture and subculture that person might sit in, it really dictates how they're going to feel that. However, it's also personal experience. If you went to a school for a long time where purple was one of the main colors, you might have a very different feeling about that color than someone who went to your rival's school, right? So they produce emotions, and we have to be aware of that as designers. Here are a couple of resources that I want you to go to. For your one of your assignments for this module, your assignment is to go to these two websites. And what I want you to do is pick out a 5-color color scheme using the resources that are available to you from here. I don't care which combination you use. I don't care what your base is, all of that. But I want you to pick out 5 colors that you think work well together based on the rules that we've talked about here. And then I want you to create a color scheme for yourself. If you choose to change it later on, that's totally fine. If you end up, in about 2 weeks saying, ugh, this color scheme is awful, I'm tired of looking at it, that's also totally fine. But I want you to start thinking about colors and how you're going to well up certain emotions in your viewers now, given what your topic is that you submitted last time. So with that being said, I hope you enjoy this. If you have any questions about color, please do feel free to email me, and I will see you next time.